All right, so we are live. Welcome to the show, everyone. The Democrat Party is becoming, let's say, increasingly radical in the positions that they defend. From actual gang members to transing the kids, it just doesn't seem like the kind of thing that the average American can get behind. So what exactly is the strategy for them here? Is there one? And how is it going to end? All right, likewise, DEI may be destroying David Hogg's career at the DNC. Trump Derangement Syndrome apparently is the #1 voting issue for Canadians of the baby boomer generation. And we take a brief look at Trump's first 100 days, which have been a total whirlwind. So we're going to talk about all of this and more on episode 493 of the In the Tank podcast.
When ultimately the people at fault are Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Jill Biden, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, every elected member of Congress.
So true. All right. Welcome to the In the Tank podcast. I hope you guys liked the edit that Jim made for the intro there. I am Linnea Lueken, and today, as usual, we have Jim Lakely, Vice President at the Heartland Institute. Jim, what is happening?
How y'all doing? I'm glad we're going to talk a little bit about the election up in Canada the other day. I don't understand what's going on up there. I know we have viewers and listeners in Canada. I'm praying for you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And we also have back from who knows where, Timbuktu or something, Chris Talgo, Editorial Director at the Heartland Institute and Socialism Research Fellow. Chris, how are you feeling? We have missed you on the show here.
Yeah, it's been about a month, but my shoulder is getting better. I'm not listening to the doctor's orders, so I'm kind of progressing much faster than they'd like to, but that's just the way it's going to be. So.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. We also have Sam Karnick, Senior Fellow at the Heartland Institute. Sam, how does it go over by where you are?
I'm doing fine. Everything's good. It's nice to be here, and I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I'm seeing our audience is mourning the loss of Canada here. We might want to have a moment of silence for Canada. We will get to that. But before we get started, you guys, as always, if you want to support the show, you can go to heartland.org/inthetank and donate there. Please also click the thumbs up to like the video. And remember that sharing helps to break through some of YouTube's suppression. Even just leaving a comment helps too. If you're an audio listener, you can help us out by leaving us a nice review on whatever platform it is that you're using. All right, so before we get to the stuff about Canada, we do have, although it was competing for the position of unhinged, but today for topic number 1 under unhinged, we have David Hogg. If any of you guys remember, his career is threatened by maybe one of the funniest strokes of irony I've seen. Anyway, for those of you fortunate enough to not be aware or have forgotten who David Hogg is, just as a reminder, he's an anti-gun activist who is one of the most astroturfed careers this side of Greta, in my opinion. He somehow managed to nab the title of Democratic National Committee Vice Chair recently, but it turns out by the Dems' own rules, his position may have been gained illegitimately. So from the Blaze, we have Semaphore reports a candidate who failed to win a DNC leadership role earlier this year is now saying the DNC violated its own bylaws by not electing enough people with diverse backgrounds to be in the top positions. The complaint was filed by Kaylin Free, a Native American attorney. The DNC's Credentials Committee will meet virtually on May 12th to consider the challenge. By aggregating votes across ballots and failing to distinguish between gender categories in a meaningful way, the DNC's process violated its own charter and bylaws, undermining both fairness and gender diversity, said Free. Hogg's lawyers say that the election was conducted in compliance with the rules in place at the time, and that it's inappropriate to try to revise those rules or decisions after the fact through a credentials challenge. So I thought this was way too funny not to share. So Jim, you brought this to our attention, I think. So I'm going to go to you for it first.
Yeah, I mean, what I find really ironic is that there's actually two layers of irony in this. The one that is most obvious is the idea that David Hogg may lose his position as vice chair of the DNC because he is not diverse enough. The second layer of irony is that David Hogg is so unqualified for a leadership position in the National Party, you would think he was a DEI hire for that position. The last I checked, I don't think the Democrats have whiny beta male as a category of underrepresented person in the DNC. In fact, you could argue that whiny beta male is overrepresented in the DNC. It is kind of their entire brand. Kind of sidecar to this. I don't know if you guys saw the interview that Tim Walz, I almost forgot his name. He's so irrelevant, but he was the vice presidential candidate with Kamala Harris. And he gave an interview where he said his position on the ticket was because he was able to speak to men who like football and like to fix their trucks. If you watched Tim Walz on the campaign trail for 30 seconds, you would know that, again, he was not qualified to hold such a position in the DNC. And what this really shows is that that party is really lost, and it doesn't have priorities that are in line with the majority of Americans when they have to check boxes. And it must be that their leadership is not populated by the most qualified and experienced political strategists and people who have their finger on the pulse of the American people, because the job of a political party in the United States and in Canada is to get votes and to implement an agenda. And the DNC is completely lost when it is focused so strongly on DEI stuff, to the fact that David Hogg, whose arrogance is in inverse proportion to his intelligence and competence, now may be the victim of that after all. This is not a party that seems poised to regain power in the United States anytime soon. And I think that's a good thing, because they don't really reflect the vast majority of views and policy desires of the American people.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very I don't know. I guess we don't want to harp on it too much, because I don't want them to catch on that they're making major missteps here with this kind of fixation. But Chris, what's your take here? Does David Hogg deserve the position of vice chair at the DNC, or is he the perfect person for this position? Actually,
Well, I mean, I don't know about his qualifications for the DNC chair position. I did see an interview with him and what's his name from Louisiana? Jim, help me out here.
James Carville.
James Carville, excuse me. Yeah, sorry. So him and James Carville were really going at it between the identity politics stuff and whether they're not Democratic Party is going to win elections in the future. And, I think Carville made some really good points. But what I think really has happened here is that the Democrat Party has embraced identity politics for the past decade or so, and it is falling apart and it is eating them alive. The Republican Party has rejected identity politics and they've embraced working class issues. That's why the Republican Party has expanded so much since Trump came down that escalator in 2015 to where we are now in 2025. And that's why the Democrat Party is going the opposite direction, because they are just obsessed with identity politics, trans stuff, women's stuff, black stuff, everything. It's all about slicing and dicing the population into different segments and playing them off one another. That doesn't work. That doesn't help the American people. What helps the American people is when Donald Trump says, I'm going to get in office. I'm going to shut down the border. I'm going to keep taxes low. I'm going to deregulate. I'm going to make energy more affordable. I'm going to improve your life. The Republican Party is a very serious party who has embraced middle class, working class Americans, and actually is addressing their concerns. The Democrat Party is off in la la land talking about DEI and identity politics and all this stuff that the American people are just completely over. That, I think, really is what's going on here.
Yeah, I believe we have that clip of Tim Waltz here if we want to throw that up there to punish our audience for a moment.
I was on the ticket, I would argue, because we did a lot of amazing progressive things in Minnesota that improved people's lives. But I also was on the ticket, quite honestly, you know, because I could code talk to white guys watching football, fixing their truck, doing that I could put them at ease. I was the permission structure to say, look, you can do this and vote for this. And you look across those swing states, with the exception of Minnesota, we didn't get enough of those.
It's
Code talking to normal people. That's the theme of today's of today's podcast anyway. You know, the rise of the normies, or the war on normies, I should say.
Yeah, never forget that this is the guy that tried to call J.D. Vance and Donald Trump weird when it's the complete opposite. Everything that he was saying, the things that he does, putting tampons in kids' bathrooms, in men's, young boys' bathrooms, that's really weird. So once again, this is identity politics just crushing them at their core. Whereas the Republican Party, abandoned identity politics a long time ago and just said, we're going to actually address the concerns of the American people. And that's why the Republican Party is expanding and the Democrat Party is in free fall.
Absolutely. Sam, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, sure. Since the Democrat Party changed its approach under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, they decided to present themselves as the party of the common person, and that they're going to protect you from the elites, which in fact they were and were being run by. So it's interesting because I think the reason that David Hogg had any kind of drew any kind of attention in the first place was because he was a so-called survivor of a school shooting down in Florida, which is a tragic situation, of course. I think it's kind of absurd to call a person a survivor if they weren't actually shot at, but okay, so he was there. And he played that off into a big publicity thing and, got a lot of money that way. And so he eventually got this position as a sort of a reward for victim status. So he was a victim. The problem is, I think, that because he was a victim of events and not a victim of systemic problems with the United States in our fundamentally evil ways, that he was eventually going to be overtaken by people who have a real, a real claim to victim status by race or gender or, the transsexual status, things like that. So I think that this victim situation has come back to bite him, and it was inevitable.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. All right, I didn't want to spend too much time on that, but I thought it was funny, and David Hogg is really annoying, so we wanted to hit on that. All right, so another thing that's rather annoying and quite puzzling, actually. So apparently in the latest Canadian election, rip. Sorry, Canada. This is a bad turn of events for you guys. But so Canadians of the baby boomer generation made dealing with Trump their top factor in who they voted for in the recent election. So this report from The Hub explains recent polling from Abacus reveals the most important factors in determining how Canadians will vote, and the age gaps are stark. While news coverage is intensely focused on the threat from Trump, this is not the case for much of the population. Only 16% of Canadians between 18 and 29 think dealing with Trump is one of the two most important factors in deciding their vote. This contrasts starkly with seniors, with 50% saying that dealing with the Trump threat is one of their top issues. If reducing the cost of living is top of mind, you're much more likely to be a millennial in the 30 to 44 year age range. Half of Canadians in this age group say that this is one of their top issues. Meanwhile, less than 2 out of 5 seniors say reducing the cost of living is one of their top issues. So the fact that this question was even polled at all was kind of surprising to me. I'm not sure why on a poll of voting issues, Trump would even come into it. I guess I'm guessing that Canadian media is fixated on him. And I do wonder what the cause of the huge disparity is but it kind of, to me, sounds like television network viewership might be involved. I don't know. So I'm pitching this to the general panel here. Obviously, American politics has effects, around the world, especially for our direct neighbors. But what do Canadians mean when they say that dealing with Trump is a top priority? It's not like they can overthrow Trump's administration or something, right? So what do we have going on here, guys?
Can I just start off real quick, everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I I just finished Carol Ross' book, You Will Own Nothing. And there was she did a big section on housing. And one of the things that really stood out to me was in Canada, housing and affordability is even worse than it is here in America, especially for younger Canadians. So I think one of the things that is driving younger Canadians to not be as anti-Trump as the baby boomers are is that they are actually having a much more difficult time, achieving the Canadian dream, if that even ever existed. And a lot of that is the fact that Canada is a very highly regulated, highly taxed. It is, a very, very progressive, very liberal economy that is not boosting the living standards for young people and not making opportunities for them to advance nearly as possible as it was 40, 50 years ago. And that's a theme that is definitely taking place here in the United States of America. People in my generation and younger, it's harder for us to achieve the American dream in this economy with, the housing situation and all this kind of stuff. So I think that for baby boomers, maybe they are much more comfortable. Maybe they have a home. Maybe they aren't impacted by these super progressive policies that Canada has been pushing for the past, 20, 30, 40 years. So maybe it's not impacting them as much. But the people who actually care about the future, they understand the difference here. And this goes back to, again, like we talked about earlier, identity politics and all that kind of stuff versus actually improving people's lives. Donald Trump, in his first term, improved the lives of working class Americans. That is a fundamental fact. Their wages went up. Their opportunities improved. The opposite happened under Biden. The opposite happened under Trudeau. And unfortunately, it seems like the Canada's not nearly as down this road as America is. But I would not be surprised if in the future the Conservative Party actually does win. And keep in mind that the Liberal Party won a very, very small victory. They had to form a coalition based on a very, very slim margin. So this notion that the progressive takeover of Canada is alive and well is not necessarily true. Maybe they are not where we are or Britain is with Brexit and all that kind of stuff, but I think they are trending in that direction. And I think the fact that Canadian youth are especially fed up with the system just goes to show that they are on this populist working class wavelength here.
I would point out that Canada has about 40 million people right now, and they have been importing 500,000 a year for the last few years. And since really about 2000, 2002, they have been increasing their population deliberately by bringing in many immigrants. Well, the problem that you have is that you're not building houses to hold all those people. So the value of housing in Canada is through the roof. It has increased very dramatically. And guess who owns houses more commonly than others? Older people. So the values of their homes are rising, have been rising rapidly, and they're doing very well under this situation. Younger people can't buy homes, and it's a very despairing situation for younger people in Canada. Things are not going to get better until they make a choice about immigration. There are areas of Canada where the people simply don't even want to be part of Canada anymore. For example, Alberta would love to join the United States. So this is a dire problem. It's entirely by choice, and it's by the choice of the ruling party. And they were put back in because the older people said, we're doing well here, and we don't care about the younger ones. It's a terrible shame.
Just real quick, Jim, can I just take one more second?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I did watch Mark Carney's speech the other day, And it was very antagonistic to the United States. And I just was kind of struck by how it almost seemed like he was, like beating the drums for war with the United States. And I don't think that that's helpful. I don't think that that's necessary. I think that they are actually just being way too petty with, some of Donald Trump's sarcastic remarks about maybe making Canada the 51st state. It's all in jest. It's just joking. It's not true. And man, Karnick was acting like, he is, basically going to put the troops on the border and try to launch an all-out assault against us. This is not helpful. The United States and Canada have a very long history. We should be economically aligned. I hope that cooler heads prevail, and I hope that Karnick does not, start a trade war or any sort of conflict with the United States.
Yeah.
You see a lot of interesting talk online right now, and it's I want to point out to some of our viewers that are a little bit confused by this. If 50% of people age 60 and over in Canada are saying that dealing with Donald Trump is their top priority, that's not a matter of like the polls trying to trick you into thinking that the boomers are against Trump. It's a matter of 50% of people who responded to this poll in that age bracket said that that was their top priority. And it's a problem that that's their top priority. And it's probably true in general that Canadians are more liberal than citizens of the United States. And like, I really do think that media has something to do with part of this, because I know for a fact that the Canadian mainstream media have been spinning up over in a tizzy over Trump's comments, especially earlier in the year. I was seeing people, conservative Canadians, saying on X and stuff that like Trump is a threat to Canada and we're going to be invaded and blah, blah, blah. And saying, oh, Americans need to step up because we're going to defend our land and blah, blah. There's a lot of people who are spun up by Trump's commentary. So this polling result doesn't overly surprise me. What surprises me is the way that the election ended up going. I did not think that something like this would be able to flip it so hard. It's very unusual. Jim?
Yeah, I mean, we have do you want to play that video clip, Linnea? Is it worth playing that video clip that we have? I mean, we're talking about Canadian politics. None of us really are, I would think, experts in Canadian politics, but we do watch it and we can pay attention. But I think we're pretty good at politics in general. So here is an actual expert on Canadian politics talking about these shocking poll results.
And you've got a few thousand people.
We're up around 7,000 right now. But David, just to show the viewers how it differs, just click on there on baby boomers.
Okay, so now we're saying this is all respondents. This is just people who are boomers. What do they think is the top issue?
Canada-U.S. relations. So you see one of the reasons why older people are voting for the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party is way ahead on this issue. They own it. And if you're a boomer, you're focused on it.
Okay, now you wanted to contrast with...
Let's talk to our friends in Gen Z.
Gen Z. What do they think is the top issue?
Affordability and cost of living. So when you look at... and so when you look at the differences...
And that maps, sorry to interrupt, but that maps more to Poilievre's side of the equation.
Absolutely. This is time for a change, voters. Right. We're seeing some of them show up in Atlantic Canada tonight in a very efficient way so far. So that contrast on what people think this election is about, whether it's about Donald Trump in the U.S. or it's about their own affordability situation and what's going on in their own homes, that's what the race is about.
And once again, this is polling done as people left the polling booth today.
Did you guys notice that climate change was nowhere in the priorities of Gen Z, or Gen Z as we say properly in the United States? And it was very far down on the list among baby boomers. But yeah, I mean, Trump, that's the little segment here we got, is that Trump Derangement Syndrome is rampant among Canada's 60 and older. Producer Andy, can you put up that bar chart real quick before? And I just want to talk about a couple things here before we move on to our next topic. No, that's the line chart, the bar chart, please, with the Canada boomers. There we go. The most important factors when deciding the vote, as you mentioned, Linnea, 50% of boomers, half of all boomers said that was the most important factor in deciding their vote. Look at the priorities of Gen Z and millennials, And they care about stuff like reducing the cost of living, growing the economy. 16 overs do not care about that at all. Making Canada a better place to live. What is that? 7%, 5% of boomers think that's an important factor when deciding their vote. Where again, the younger people want to live in a country, a Canada that is a better place to live. They want to reduce the cost of living. They want to be able to make housing more affordable in their country. But if you're going to, I'm actually just I'm not surprised by this, but it's like, the irony here, or actually the interesting thing, maybe Sam and Chris can react to this as well, that the Democrats in the 2024 election in the United States basically tried to make Trump Derangement Syndrome into a national movement and the way for them to retain the White House as Democratic Party. And it failed spectacularly. I think exit polls showed that messaging was an absolute and complete failure. In fact, it was probably counterproductive, that people were reacting to the way the Democrats were characterizing Donald Trump, with whom they had 4 years of previous experience, and said, no, that's not going to affect my vote. In fact, it's going to make me a stronger Trump supporter because I know you're lying. He is not a totalitarian. He is not going to round us up and put us into camps. He's not going to start arresting journalists. Any of that, all that stuff was all, I don't want to use the word, of that famous German leader from the middle of the 20th century. Infamous German leader of the middle 20th century. I don't want to get this podcast flagged again, but it worked in Canada. And I think maybe there was more of it had more run in Canada because, Canada was being quote unquote bullied by the big bully Donald Trump in the United States. But it was really in jest, and it's just kind of sad that Canadian voters want to define themselves as tough by standing up to Trump and the United States. It didn't used to be this way. Ronald Reagan and Barack Obama and George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush, U.S.-Canada relations were very strong. Did it cost the conservatives up there in the election because Donald Trump started talking about tariffs and imposing tariffs to try to get a better trade deal with Canada? Okay, I guess so, because the line chart that we showed that the conservatives, because of the disastrous last 10 years of leadership under Justin Trudeau, implementing, basically the WEF agenda upon that poor country, you could see there from the chart that the conservatives were in line for a sweeping victory to turn the Liberal Party out, perhaps for another decade on their own end. And then if you look at the way the chart, the two lines converge, is basically right after Donald Trump took office in mid-January, and started talking about tariffs. So, all right, if you want to blame Trump that's for that, I can take that. That's fine. But I just feel bad for Canadians because they're going to get a renewal of the globalist WEF agenda for, I know that Karnick is a big net zero guy. We're going to talk on the Climate Realism show tomorrow about how, well, let's just say Europe went net zero a little ahead of schedule with a big blackout on the Iberian Peninsula. So, that's just sometimes, what was it? H.L. Mencken, you would know this, Sam Karnick. H.L. Mencken says democracy is the people voting for what they want and getting it good and hard. And so that's what Canada's getting now.
Yeah, it is interesting how fast, as soon as the United States starts trying to negotiate for trade deals that benefit the United States, you find out really fast who your allies are and who they're not. And it turns out the United States doesn't have allies, actually, perhaps. So we will see about that. All right. So speaking of Trump, obviously, so Trump's first 100 days have been, at least in my lifetime, for sure, the most tumultuous 100 days of any administration, especially in terms of the sheer volume of actions taken in trying to take apart the last, decade of liberalization of our government, and not liberalization in the becoming more classical liberal, but liberalization in terms of moving left. So PJ Media published a briefing that I want to highlight one section of because it was pretty poignant, I think. They write, the president and his people have been working with an urgency driven by the dire straits that Joe Biden and his idiot handlers left the country in. There was no time to slow play an agenda if the republic was going to be saved. Things were not that bad, or things were that bad. I had never gone into existential crisis mode until Biden and his slow kid commie cabal came into power. Trump is also aware that there is no guarantee that the GOP will continue his work when the term is done, so he knows that he has to assume that making America great again is all on him. It would be nice to believe that he's getting things moving in the right direction for years to come, but we have all met the Republican Party. It certainly does feel like drinking from a fire hose at times. So, Chris, is there anything in these first 100 days that particularly has stood out to you? Like, what's your favorite thing that's happened thus far?
Okay, I'm not going to reduce it to one thing because there are
Okay,
a
go
couple.
ahead.
There are like 3 or 4 things that are, I think, very important, and I think that Donald Trump has done a great job on. Number one, the border. We were told for 4 years during the Biden administration that there was nothing he could do, that Congress needed to pass new laws, blah 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 blah. We saw millions of people pour into this country. That had a devastating effect on cities. It increased crime, it increased benefits, all this kind of stuff. Donald Trump literally solved that within 100 days. Less than 100 days. The border is completely sealed. We are arresting illegal immigrants and deporting them from the country. So that, I think, is one of the greatest, promises that he has delivered so far. Okay, aside from that, I am very, very glad that Donald Trump is embracing fossil fuels. I'm very glad that he is making coal usable again. I'm very glad that he is opening up drilling here in the United States, and that we are going to export liquefied natural gas, to Europe, and all these kind of things, because that's going to have a worldwide impact. It's going to weaken Russia. It's going to really help us. It's going to help Europe. So on the energy front, I think he is knocking it out of the park. Okay, on the spending cuts, I once again, I said this about 6 weeks ago, that it's almost like you got to pinch yourself every day when you see stuff like this. When I saw that Linda McMahon, the education secretary, said that she has cut their staff by 50% in 100 days, that just makes me so warm and fuzzy, because you know what? I would never have thought that would have ever happened. I thought that we were going to be stuck in this, $1 trillion deficit forever, and that we were never going to really get to the bottom of this. It looks like we are getting to the core of this. It looks like the reconciliation bill is right on track. Tax cuts are going to be extended, and even better, and I really need to stress this, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Well, I shouldn't say that. The reconciliation bill that they are working on right now, that includes extension for the TCJA. It's also going to include a bunch of new tax breaks for the middle class in particular. No taxes on Social Security, no taxes on tips, no taxes on overtime. That is going to boost incomes for the middle and working class, gangbusters. Lastly, the tariff thing. Geez, I've had so many discussions with so many people on so many different angles of this. I personally am very pro the United States playing hardball with the countries that have taken advantage of us for 40, 50 years post World War II. They have rigged the system where it's impossible, I shouldn't say it's possible, very difficult for us to sell our products to their country, but it is so easy for them to just dump their products into our country. So I have been on this note for a very long time of the Rust Belt got shafted. It got so shafted in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s. And Donald Trump came out of nowhere in 2015 and said, you know what, I've been talking about this for 40 years, but we need to reindustrialize the United States. It's national security. There's also just these people want to work. They want to work. And they were told, no, you idiot, go learn how to code. Finally, someone's actually, standing up for their interests. So I know I just put a lot on the table there, but those are my big things. And I am extremely excited for the first 100 days and for the next 1,000 days.
Absolutely. Chris, you hit almost all of the points. All right, Sam, what do you have?
Sorry, everybody. Sorry.
Oh, no, no problem. I think that one interesting thing to me is that in his first term, Trump tried to go through Congress in an important way. Obviously, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was the biggie. But in this one, he was ready to go in and do whatever he could in terms of whatever a president can do and legally get it done. There was much greater preparation now. And even in 2022 and 2023, you could see on Truth Social things that Trump was saying that he was planning to do, and they've been done or are being done. So he was planning forward in a way that he had not done in 2016 in preparation for 2017. And the key thing, I think, is that with the kind of changes that he's been trying to make here, he hasn't been doing just what he would like to do. So, for example, if you want to close the border, you don't say, I want to close the border. He did that in his first term, and he got a lot of heat for it and all kinds of lawsuits against it. This time, he just closed the border. Well, how could he do that? Because he went for sending immigrants back, sending the people who are here illegally, sending them back to their countries, repatriating them. So what that did was it changed the ground on which we're all standing. So the discussion is no longer, should we close the border? That's already done. He just went and did it, and there was very little reaction to that. The real action has come in the repatriation or sending back of people who are here illegally. That's now the issue. What you do is you ask for the moon and you accept what you can get. But you also try to get the moon, and he is trying to get that. And interestingly enough, the opposition seems to be playing into his hands in all these areas. So in terms of the economy, instead of saying, well, we need to make sure we get the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act tax cuts extended. Well, yes, that's something you absolutely must do. But what he did was he said, okay, we're going to shut down a whole bunch of things in the government. We're going to go for a big tax cut on top of all these other tax cuts. We're going to get rid of the income tax altogether. So what he does is he asks for the biggest things possible. And then the opposition has to fight that biggest thing, because you can't just let that pass. So they have to fight that in addition to fighting all the little things. So this shows really good planning, and the art of the deal is clearly behind all this, where you say, you don't tell the other side what you really will accept. You tell them what you really want. And anyone who's a classical liberal and maybe somebody who, like me, if you're operating in a think tank and in this world, you recognize that the ideal would be, for example, let's say in terms of schools, the ideal would be that there's no government schools at all. No schools are run by the government. All schools are run by outside organizations, and the government pays for it. Or maybe the government doesn't even pay for schooling at all. But what you'll accept is education savings accounts and things like that, scholarship programs and the like. So, but you have to have that vision of what the ideal really would look like. And in my view, Trump's vision is that the ideal would be an America where people really are free to live and work and make deals with one another. And they're not, in particular, they are not getting put in a box by globalism and by globalists. And that is where, as Chris mentioned, the tariff situation, that's where that all comes in, because one of the things that has affected the United States very powerfully over the past really 75, 80 years is the use of the dollar as the reserve currency. And Trump's tariff actions, I believe, are meant to fix that problem. So he's operating. He's got the big picture. He knows what he wants. He knows what would be best, and he's going to get every bit of it that he can. And he's going about it in a much more organized and ambitious way in this term.
Yeah, the aggression of him implementing all this stuff, or at least trying to get the ball rolling on all the stuff that he's been promising for years, has been really something to see. And then we've mentioned it before on the show that the media can't even keep up with it. I mean, they've barely even noticed what he's done to the EPA and those kind of like fringe agencies that have been running our lives for so long. Jim, where are you standing on the first 100 days of the Trump administration?
Yeah, well, the where I stand on the first 100 days is that there's just such a difference in Donald Trump's political courage. I mean, he has a lot more of it now than he did from 2016 to 2020. Now, of course, it helps that he doesn't have the FBI and the CIA and the deep state conspiring to illegally thwart his agenda and policy preferences. That certainly makes it a little easier to keep your feet under you. But he has learned a lot from that first experience, and it shows. In his first term, it was very frustrating for conservatives to see that Donald Trump still seemed to really care a lot about what the New York Times wrote about him. I mean, he'd still do sit downs with Maggie Haberman and and others at the New York Times, and then he'd be shocked that the paper that would work, would continue to characterize everything he did in the worst possible light, if not outright lie about what he said. He called CNN and others fake news, but he still seemed to hold on to this thread that the corrupt legacy media was going to one day give him a fair shake. If they just saw the successes I had, they would finally report on me fairly. And his first term was a success. And they did not, in fact, they just accelerated and intensified their unfair characterization of Donald Trump and his supporters through the years anyway. He didn't do a lot of the stuff that a lot of his supporters wanted him to do in that first term. I believe Donald Trump thought that just the tax cuts package would, quote, make America great again. And, he was partially right on that. But he's learned, as you alluded to there, Linnea, that he's learned that you have to flood the zone with reforms, and especially from the executive branch. In his first term, Donald Trump, and this is an understandable error, but he made some really terrible cabinet appointments. These were weak men and women for the most part, and they didn't have the determination, let alone the political connections, to execute the agenda that he had run on and that people voted for, which was a repudiation and reversal of Obamaism. But if I wanted to pick just one item that in the first 100 days that I am most excited about and is long overdue, and it's the defunding and dismantling of the Green New Deal. He's extracting the United States from the global climate cult, and he's getting the United States bureaucracy and federal funded science out of the climate scam here in the United States. And I think that is going to be, there's lots of things that could be Donald Trump's policy legacy, that we would look back on in another decade and look at it being the most impactful. I would put Donald Trump basically getting the United States out of the climate scam is going to be looked back as one of the most important things that he has ever done. If he's able to finish executing it, by the way, there's a lot of lawsuits that are going to have to be fought to make all these things happen. But it's he is moving at breakneck speed, and it's only been, is today the 103rd day of his second term? It feels like it's been 100 months at least, the amount of stuff that's happened. It's great. Looking forward to more.
I think the messaging from the Trump administration during the first 100 days is far superior than it was during the entire first term. I'll just give an example of how they put the faces of these illegal immigrant murderers and rapists along the White House lawn, so that when NBC and ABC and CBS have to go and do their White House press coverage, guess what? They have to see those there.
That's
I think
right.
that
That's
Stephen
great.
Miller, I think, the White House press team is just doing an awesome job delivering a consistent, coherent message of, we are doing things for the good of the American people. We don't care what the mainstream media thinks or how they try to spin these things. One other thing, I completely agree with Jim's assessment of how Donald Trump is dismantling the Green New scam. Thank God for that. You wish him total success in that endeavor. But I think we need to understand that it took a lot of courage for Donald Trump to do the tariffs before the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act thing, because it would have been, I think, a lot easier for him to say, you know what, I'll put the tariffs, on the back burner. Let's really make sure we get this, reconciliation bill done. But you know what? That would have been, I think, a mistake, because it's going to take months for those negotiations to take place. And Donald Trump knew, okay, I've only got a couple of years. Who knows what's going to happen in 2026 in terms of, Congress and midterm elections and all that. I am going to play hardball from the first second I come into the office, and I'm going to finally, after all this time, go to these other countries and say, guys, we're gonna level the playing field one way or another. And it's not just about the tariffs. It's about the currency manipulation, and it's about the other barriers to free and fair trade that these countries have been putting up over, several years now. So Donald Trump addressed that first. He took a big hit. The markets, of course, went down, and, everyone on CNBC and the ABC and CBS and NBC are talking about how the economy is in, shambles. No, it's not. This is just a very temporary hissy fit from Wall Street, because their rigged system is finally, hopefully, coming to an end. And the American people, the masses, the forgotten people, we understand this. And that's why they're polling. I don't even pay attention to any of their polling. MSNBC and CNN and all the usual suspects this week have just been, flooding the zone with polls saying Donald Trump is so unpopular, blah, blah, blah. Guess what? Your polls are meaningless to us, because you lied about your polls in 2016, 2020, and 2024. Therefore, we don't believe your polls anymore. When I'm just out and about, whether it's at the grocery store, at the gas station, wherever, I'm not saying that I'm seeing Trump flags everywhere and people like high-fiving, like, yeah, Trump's the greatest. But there's just a different sense. And I'm telling you, I feel it. And I even just talking to some people who you just wouldn't even expect, like, hey, like, what do you think about how things are going so far? They're like, yeah, I think things are great. It's like, whoa, really? Like, cool. So I'm just going on that, benchmark here. I think it's been a great 100 days. And I think that this is, really building the foundation for a great term, and hopefully, more this to come for years.
Yeah, absolutely. And as one of our commenters mentioned, Trump was a bit annoyed. Remember, they did pierce his ear. I think that was a pretty major turning point in setting the tone for how he was going to approach the administration. Was, they tried to kill him. He's not, he's not taking that very well, or at least he's not taking it seriously anymore when the left is complaining about right-wing violence and, oh, Trump is a danger to our democracy and blah, blah, blah. He just doesn't care at all. There are reports a couple of weeks ago, I think maybe 2 weeks ago, that one of his staffers told the media that he has hit the, F it button, and they can say whatever they want. He is not being influenced by it anymore whatsoever. It's actually fueling him to like lash out at them quite a bit. And so it's over. They played their hand way too strong. When the assassination attempt happened, I think that they had the opportunity to kind of back down on some of their rhetoric and to try and play the maybe not the unifier, but definitely like apologetics for the way that they've been behaving towards him for the last couple of years. But they didn't. They doubled down on all of their craziness and, went on. There were major figures in the media who were saying things like, oh, well, he had this coming, he shouldn't have worn that short skirt walking downtown, kind of thing. So it's no wonder. Absolutely no wonder. All right. So Trump's first 100 days have been more or less like a major reaction and like a firm attempt by Trump to combat a lot of what we've been seeing from the Democrats for the last, and also Republicans for the last several decades. And so our main topic today is what we're calling the left's war on normies. And this was actually what Sam had suggested we call it. And he's right. I think for those of you who maybe aren't super familiar with the internet language there, Normies just meaning people that are, more or less average, maybe people who aren't super duper in tune with politics all the time, people who aren't super online would be normies. So with Trump's changes comes a lot of doubling down, actually, even now from Democrats. It seems like the stuff that's generally not popular with normal people, like being what seems to be pro-crime, not arresting criminals or putting them right back out on the streets that we've been dealing with in major cities for years, the transgender stuff. I mean, we've been suffering weeks of Democrats flying to El Salvador to the point where some Democrat staffers now are even complaining about it to the news, saying that it actually looks really bad for Democrats to be doing this. They say, it was appropriate for the Maryland representative to go down there, but now that we've got like Cory Booker and all of them trying to go, it's ridiculous. It's obviously a show and it looks bad for everybody involved. So, but for more craziness at a different pitch, I'm just kind of setting all of this up for you guys when I pitch it to the panel. But I also want to highlight a case recently that luckily ended well for us, where the University of Louisville had been demoting and harassing and ultimately fired a professor for speaking out in his professional capacity as a psychiatrist on the harms of transitioning children. So this isn't about Democrats specifically, but the kind of things that they support and have allowed to persist at major influential institutions, especially in the universities and hospitals. So here's the description from the Alliance Defending Freedom. They explain, the university hired Dr. Alan Josephson to head up the then struggling Division of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and Psychology, which he turned around into a program that received a national reputation for its work. He received high praise from the university and outside psychiatric associations, and he was sought out for advice on how to improve and lead other child and adolescent psychiatry divisions. But when Josephson, not really sure, but I think it's Josephson, during a Heritage Foundation panel discussion, spoke in his personal capacity against subjecting children to harmful drugs and surgery in radical, misguided attempts to treat gender dysphoria, university officials responding to demands from activists at the university's LGBT center demoted him to the role of a junior faculty member and stripped him of teaching duties. University officials then conspired to get him fired. These efforts included keeping an Allen tracking document, solicited complaints from alumni who were coached on what to say, and discussing the need to generate strong documentation to avoid his reappointment. In February 2019, the university announced that it would not renew his contract, terminating his employment at the university after nearly 15 years of distinguished service. So this isn't normal. It hasn't ever been normal. Sam, you suggested this topic, and I think it's important for us to kind of, at the very least, pick at the edges of why the Democrats have become like this. Why are the inmates running their asylum there? Why have they just given all of the command of their party over to the most extreme element? Why would they not be moderating it?
I think it goes back to what I said earlier, so we can start with that, which is that they have always presented themselves since the FDR years, Franklin Delano Roosevelt presidency, the New Deal and all that. They've always presented themselves as the party of the underdog, that they're there to protect you if you have a bad start in life. And so the what they've run into, though, is that they've taken their rhetoric seriously, and they've actually come to believe the increasingly crazy things they say. So what you get with, say, Hakeem Jeffries is he's saying, don't say that out loud. Don't go down to El Salvador and hang out with MS-13 members in the jail down there. This is dumb. It's not good PR. What he doesn't say is that this is not a good thing to do. But they should have known, frankly, whether this was a smart thing to do by the fact that Bukele let him in, let the congressman in. So it's Bukele is, of course, the president of El Salvador. Is it the president? I think that's what they're called over there. And but he's certainly the political leader of El Salvador, and he let the congressman come in and hang out. And so he knew that this was a dumb idea. And so I think what happens is that as you characterize yourself and come to believe in yourself as we are the elites, we are the ones who know better than everybody else, and we're going to protect the underdog from those fascists in the middle, those people who they have jobs and guns and they go to church and they when they get home they barbecue real meat, not zucchini or whatever. They live these weird lives. They look at normal people as weird. This is simply a bizarro world kind of a mentality. And I would note that Andrew Breitbart, very great conservative, the late Andrew Breitbart, had said that politics is downstream of culture. And his idea was that you need to change the culture if you're going to change the politics of a country. Well, a few years back, I wrote an article that basically showed how much the federal government in particular, but how much government in the United States at all levels was affecting the culture, how much they were doing. And this was, as the communists used to say, this is no accident. And it was no accident. They were trying to control the culture so that they could change the minds of the people. Well, that should be a lesson to you that politics may be downstream of culture, but culture is downstream of politics. It must be a circle or something, because until you take over the politics, you can't fix the culture. We couldn't get in it. You couldn't get in these universities as a professor and survive for very long. You couldn't get into Hollywood and survive. You couldn't do any of that. And that was starting from the government on down. So what has happened is Trump won and the Republicans won. And now they have more control over things. And so you are seeing changes. One of the big elements that we also must recognize is that the changes in how information gets sent around the world, but in particular in the United States, that was changed by winning on the highest level by Twitter. So when Elon Musk bought Twitter and then ultimately changed it over to X and made it a truly freer forum, that created a new media stream. And Trump has done the same with Truth Social, and others have tried, and they were knocked out before, as you will recall. But changing that, making Twitter open, made a big difference, because you didn't have to go to NBC and CBS and ABC, PBS and hear their lies. You could just go directly and see what the president or some congressman or senator or Hakeem Jeffries says, and that has changed the ground that we're walking on. So you take all this from the top political level and the spaces where power is developed and used. You take all that, and then you take the fact that the people who were claiming to protect the underdog can no longer convince most people of that, because the underdogs that they're now protecting are not underdogs. They're punching women. They're men punching women in the face. They're men beating women in swimming contests. These are not underdogs. That's weird. These are out of the ordinary, for sure, but they're not underdogs. They're just doing what they want to do, and anyone who gets in their way has to be just shoved aside. So once you get the power of the government where they're no longer doing some of the evils that they were doing, for example, the Biden administration working with big tech to censor things, working with big tech to make sure that the Hunter Biden laptop is made to look like a foolish lie And you have supposedly credible people saying this. This all was awful, and it was being run from the top, though. And that's the thing. You have to win these institutions. You have to win those before you can change people's minds. So they've started to do that. There's a long path to go. The fact that there's some pushback against men in women's sports, for example, something so twisted and bizarre that nobody imagined it 20 years ago. Nobody even imagined it. Nobody said, oh, of course, well, if you do this, this is going to happen. No, we thought of a lot of things that were going to happen, but we didn't even think of that. So when you look at the situation, you see that there are all the pieces are in place for big change. And the war on the normies, to me, is the desperate last attempt to destroy the credibility of the people who are now slowly starting to dismantle the current elitist system, the current globalist system.
I have a slightly different take on this whole thing. I think the quote war on normies is a simple product of Democrats take the opposite of everything Trump does. So when Trump says, let's get rid of MS-13 gang members, what do the Democrats do? Let's defend MS-13 gang members. Donald Trump says, let's make sure that, we can drill for, gas and oil here in the United States. Let's not drill for gas and oil ever in the United States. When I think back to, I don't know, I mean, I was, still following politics during the Bill Clinton years. When I think back to the Bill Clinton years, era big government's over, all this kind of stuff. He put in work requirements for welfare. It was very common sense, long-term growth-oriented things. Even Barack Obama, who I was no fan of by any means, what did he do? He deported millions of people. I don't agree with many of his things. Obamacare, huge mistake. But from his agenda to the Biden agenda, it's like night and day. What caused that huge difference? Donald Trump came to office in 2016 and blew up the entire political world here in the United States. And the Democrats, very foolishly, are hell-bent on saying, well, we're just going to do the opposite of Donald Trump, does on everything. And sometimes they just look like utter fools. Like when he's saying, hey, guess what, guys, we want to make sure that, Jewish students are protected on campus and that they aren't being harassed by pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas people. What do the Democrats do? We got to defend the pro-Hamas people. It's just, it's so funny how they play into it every single time. So the thing is, and I mean, I'm, not saying that these Democrat politicians really believe all this stuff. I don't think they do. I think they're trying to just, get in the mainstream media attention and come out as the most rabid anti-Trump person because they, believe that will propel them to the forefront of the Democrat Party. I think that is a total failing strategy. And it would be much more beneficial for them to say, you know what? 70% of the people agree with this. Let's try to understand why, and let's maybe try to offer them, like a similar, if not slightly, competing, set of policies, so that we can actually get to the solutions that they want. The Democrats just aren't doing that. They are just totally playing politics, and it's blowing up in their face. So that's great.
Yeah, I've often wondered what would have happened if Trump had kept all of his exact same arguments, all of his exact same policies, and ran as a Democrat. Like what would have, what would the position on MSNBC be about mass deportations of MS-13 gang members if Trump had a D next to his name instead of an R?
Go ahead, Jim.
I'm sorry, but I don't think it would have worked. Remember that the issue of anti-Semitism is really more of an issue of, and it's a very Democrat issue right now, a very hard left issue, and that's an anti-Zionism position more than anything else. But I think it does play into anti-Semitism, and right there, it's a underdog issue that they look at the Palestinians as they're the underdogs, and so we have to support them. And so I don't think that Trump would have been successful running as a Democrat unless he had changed what he really believes in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is amazing to see the positions that the Democratic Party has been taking, and I think Chris really put his finger on it. When ever since 2016, the Democratic Party has their only agenda, their platform, is to do the 180-degree opposite of whatever Donald Trump is doing. The long-going joke is that if Donald Trump cured cancer, the Democrats would lament the loss of jobs for oncologists, right? So, but on a broader scale, right? Because we're talking about the war on normies that has been going on for quite a while now, basically all through the Biden years and now in the early years of Trump's second term. And this is happening because, and let's be honest here, the left thought that they had won and permanently set new social, political, and academic norms in the United States. And why would they not think that? I mean, the Biden government was arresting parents who showed up at school board meetings to complain that their radical transgender policies in the school district allowed boys into the girls' locker room to sexually assault their eighth grade daughter. That happened in Loudoun County, Virginia. The Associated Press changed its style book to capitalize Black as a racial thing, as to give it more prominence, I suppose. Which the AP style book is a big deal. That got taken over by woke people. Again, we've talked a lot about the woke revolution and now the anti-woke revolution right now. But there was enormous cultural, corporate, and government pressure to do things like put your pronouns in your email signatures and in your social media bios. Pride Month it seemed to a lot of Americans, a lot of normies, that Pride Month became a bigger deal than the 30 days between nationally than the 30 days between Thanksgiving and Christmas as a shared cultural event. And these things were all really out of whack. They've this is a term I've used before, just popped back into my head, is that the left weaponized people's tolerance to push a radical agenda. And again, they thought they had made a permanent victory. And what they forgot is that in politics and in social studies, in a society, no victories are ever permanent. Societies and norms are always changing, but the changes, the woke changes from the left, came so fast. We've talked about this on this podcast for a long time, that the Biden administration really hit the ground running fast in their first 100 days, by the way, because they were making up for lost time, because Hillary Clinton was supposed to win in 2016, and it was supposed to be Barack Obama's third term and then fourth term. And then Trump happened in 2016. So that got all stopped. So they went crazy fast forward with all of these things that they probably planned to slowly implement, slowly boil the pot over the next 5 or 10 years. But instead they went crazy. So the reason, this war on normies, the cultural left, they were in control of literally everything. Right? Every important institution, academia, media, Hollywood, school boards, everywhere. But even having all that control wasn't enough. They had to repeatedly spike the football in the face of normal Americans who, by and large, just wanted to be left alone, were very tolerant of other, of other viewpoints. And but instead, they get censored for what they want to say. And so, the left continually spiking the football in the face of normies, I think, helped bring about the second Trump revolution and the restoration of norms. And just one last thing, because this is a podcast on YouTube. I watch a lot of podcasts on YouTube, as I know a lot of our listeners and viewers do. The popularity of channels and commentators like Joe Rogan and Dave Rubin and Dave Smith and R.N. McIntyre and Jordan Peterson, they grew their audiences by attracting conservatives. They were already liberals. 10 years ago, each one of those persons, in fact, even to this day, they consider themselves liberals. They would say they're center left. They are not radical right-wing people. But what did the woke crowd that controlled everything do to those people? They viciously attacked them and called them radical right-wing people, when that's not the case. And so now they grew their audiences because they attracted conservatives and libertarians and normies who were attracted to people talking about common sense and resisting this radical transformation of our society that seemed to happen literally overnight. So that war is being reversed. However, as we mentioned here at the top of this segment, Linnea, when even Hakeem Jeffries has to tell Democrats, stop flying down to El Salvador and having pictures taken with with gang members from MS-13 who have been, that have been imported into this country with no rules and no regard by the Biden administration. That's a bad look, because normies think it's crazy that you would do something like that. And it comes off as saying, actually, sadly, the truth, that the Democrat Party, it seems, and the left cares more about to take that one example that they're always going down there to visit. They care more about an MS-13 gang member who illegally entered this country, committed various felonies. They're more interested in getting him back into the United States than they are in deporting thousands and thousands of other criminal gang members who got into this country illegally and getting them out of the country. Normies think that's a good idea. Radical wokies, which is still, sadly, if you're Democrat, in control of your party, think the opposite. And so this is, it's an amazing thing. But yay to the normies. We're rising and the wokies are fading.
Yeah, one thing that we hadn't touched on, but I think is an important element of, where the Democrats have really had pretty significant misalignment with the average American is on the soft on crime positions that they've taken. And some of their soft on crime positions that they've taken at the local level are so absurd, especially places like California and New York, where, someone commits some horrible crime and they're back out on the street instantly, or they don't even have to pay bail, or there's all sorts of examples of this. And the average, even probably Democrat voter, if they were fully aware that this stuff was happening to the extent that it was happening, would be appalled. Right now, there's a big kind of kerfuffle going on with the Buffalo, New York school districts, where a police officer has come forward, or police detective rather, has come forward to say that the attorneys of the school district have been blocking efforts from even state attorneys to investigate all of these abuse claims and stuff that have been going on at these schools. They're blockading police investigations. They're deleting footage of actual child attempted kidnappings and stuff. The schools are totally rogue. And it's amazing that it takes, someone just blowing up the story on a fun, goofy weekend podcast for that kind of a thing to come to the public's attention. And what does the local media do? What does the local, probably mainly Democrat media do? They just make fun of the guy who blew the story open, and are, because he's a little bit goofy and he does funny videos on YouTube sometimes. And so instead of actually addressing the concerns, which are kids being abused at New York, Buffalo schools, they're kind of making light of the issue and ignoring it. So that was one thing that I wanted to bring up. It's a developing story, but it does kind of continue to show that disjointedness between what the average American would be concerned with, child abuse, and what the Democrats and the media establishment are concerned with, which is, I don't know, protecting abusers. I'm not really sure or at least I don't think I should say on the In the Tank podcast what it is that they're doing there. But
well, I'll tell you this: if it was a Republican taking that position, it would be nothing but nonstop. GOP is protecting child abusers, or whatever. That's how they would frame every single thing. And they're not doing that. The media is not doing that because legacy media is corrupt, and their job is to protect Democrats, not tell the truth.
Yeah, absolutely.
At Donald Trump's 100 days rally in Warren, Michigan, which I caught most of the speech, it was a great speech. One of the things he kept emphasizing again and again and again was his common sense agenda. He said that during the campaign. I think what this really boils down to is Donald Trump has identified the common sense issues: border, crime, taxes, regulations, energy, and just, going full bore into those. The Democrats now, like I said earlier, have to oppose everything. So now they're on the 20% side of these 80-20 issues. And I also just will always remember Elon Musk's little drawing about how shows him and then it shows the left, and it shows how much it's changed. And that's why when I think back to Bill Clinton's presidency, that was not that long ago in the grand scheme of things, 25 years now. Bill Clinton was common sense on almost all these things as well. So what has happened to the Democrat Party? They have in the past decade just become so anti-Trump that they are refusing to take the 80% side on these issues, and it's making them look like freaks. And that's the bed that they've made for themselves, so they must sleep in it.
Absolutely. Well, if anyone else has anything to add on this topic, or have we pretty well run it out? Okay, awesome. Well, thank you guys all so much for coming and watching the show with us. We all really appreciate our audience here, but that is all the time we have, unfortunately. So again, thank you guys for tuning in. We are live every single week on Thursdays at noon Central on Rumble, Twitter, X. I keep calling it Twitter forever. YouTube, Facebook. For audio listeners, please rate us well on whatever service you're using and leave a review. That helps us out a lot. So thank you so much to our usual panelists. Let's start with Jim. What do you have to plug for us today?
You can follow me on X at @JLagley. You can follow me on X, or the organization on X, at Heartland Inst, and always be visiting heartland.org.
Absolutely. Chris?
Yeah, I want to mimic everything Jim just said. Just do those things.
Okay, Sam, what you got?
Yeah, I agree with those two fellas. They're pretty smart over there.
Okay, true that. All right, thank you, everyone. We will see you again next week. Bye.